Welcome to my short decklist guide on my budget Ahri Control list. I've been running this deck for the past few weeks at Nexus Nights now with quite some success. My champion legend is of course Ahri Nine-Tailed Fox. She gives an enemy unit that attacks my battlefield -1 for this turn, and this of course applies to each and every enemy unit that attacks this battlefield. My rune count is 6 Calm runes and 6 Mind runes, so an even split of both. As the 3 battlefields, I selected Grove of the God Willow, which rewards holding of this location by drawing 1 card. The Dreaming Tree, which whenever I choose a friendly unit with a spell here for the first time each turn, I can draw 1 card. I try to trigger this in opponents' turns as well, of course. And I'm running Trifarian Warcamp, bumping each unit at this location up by 1 might. Going into the main deck, I'm running 1 Ahri Inquisitive in my chosen champion slot. She triggers whenever she attacks or defends and gives an enemy unit at her location -2 this turn to a minimum of 1. This is a really strong card. I really like playing her, but she is a little bit squishy at 3 might. For counter spells, I'm of course in green, so I'm running 3 Defies. I'm running 3 Stupefies as cantrips and draw 1 effects. This is also super important on the Dreaming Tree, as you can stupefy your own unit for 1 energy, draw 2. I'm also running 3 On Guards as a cheap combat trick, 2 retreats as a worst case scenario, bounce back to hand. Alternatively, I often use it to re-enter with accelerate effects, or to just channel 1 Rune Exhausted. Again, if I choose a unit at the Dreaming Tree, I can draw 1 card of retreat as well. I'm also playing 2 Charms. I usually use this as removal, but I've also used this against Yi, for example. When he was sitting in 1 battlefield, I needed to conquer both. Just move the unit from the battlefield back to base and then conquer both battlefields. Now my Blast Cone phase, I'm also running 2 of. These look like a 2-drop, but because they recycle 1, I don't count them towards my 2-drops. Or at least I really don't like playing them in turn 1. I prefer playing them hidden on a battlefield that I control, so I can have a 4 might swing whenever an opponent initiates a showdown at the location. Usually in the first game they also don't expect Blast Cone phase to be the hidden cards. My next card are 3 Stalwart Poros. These are super interesting as a 1 unit defender in turn 2, so if I can play this in turn 1, I'm very happy in this deck. Second 2-drop that I'm playing 3 of is the Ravenbloom Student. This just triggers whenever I play a spell and gets 1 might that turn. This can also trigger repeatedly, so I can buff my Ravenbloom Student up to quite some might. My next spell is Discipline. Just like Stupefy, the spell replaces itself by drawing 1 whenever it resolves, and it gives a unit +2 this turn. I'm running 3 Smoke Screens for another 4 might swing whenever I'm attacked or attacking, and I'm running 2 Watchful Sentries as my remaining 2 2-drops for their Death Knell ability, mostly to draw 1 card. Card draw is a bit limited in this deck, so I'm really happy about each card draw effect. Currently, this would be the Stupefy, the Discipline, and the Watchful Sentries. The remaining cards in the main deck are 2 Eager Apprentices to reduce the energy costs of my spells a little bit, 1 Window on the main deck, 2 Consult the Pasts, and as accelerate units I'm playing 3 Sprite Mothers, 1 Thousand-Tailed Watcher, and then I'm playing 1 Dr. Mundo that I can usually use quite well if I'm burning through a lot of spells, and then I have just a very chunky unit sitting at 1 battlefield. Now, of course, you want to play this as late as possible, so it gets as big as possible, and you don't have too much of a drawback for each beginning phase when you recycle 3 cards from your trash, meaning he shrinks by 3 might. My sideboard currently looks like this. I'm running 3 Rune Prisons because I'm playing a lot of Ys, 2 Lecturing Yordles, 1 Foxfire, which I'm currently considering to swap out for a second Windwall, and 2 Adaptatrons. So let's talk about the core concepts of this deck. Of course, based on my chosen champion and champion legend, so my 2 Ahris, I am playing a holding style based deck. This means I want to conquer my battlefields as early as possible, so I need a sufficient amount of 2-drops to facilitate that. The 2-drops that I like to see are the Stalwart Poro and the Ravenbloom Students. These are a bit better in holding because they can get bigger, but my Watchful Sentries are also quite interesting because I can get an early draw usually if my opponent tries to conquer the battlefield and is successful. Another thing that is quite cool with the Watchful Sentries, because no one really expects that, is you can buff it up, for example, with an En Garde, and you can trade evenly with a 3 might unit and then get the draw effect off them. If I'm going second, I usually switch out 2 of my Watchful Sentries for my Lecturing Yordles, and another 3-drop that can come in turn 1 then is my Eager Apprentice, even though I think I still prefer my 2-drops over the Eager Apprentice in the early game. Now, in turn 2 I usually have to make a decision, and that is based on how my opponent has developed. If my opponent has developed quite well, I usually try to play a second 2-drop or hide a Blastcone Fey at a location that I just conquered, so that I can keep some runes open for my combat tricks, and I just score 1 point in that round, while keeping the option open to scoring the second battlefield in the next turn if I, for example, drop the second 2-drop. Another unit that you can drop in turn 2 is of course the Eager Apprentice, and if the opponent has not developed very well, you can also consider playing a Sprite Mother. Now this of course exhausts all of your runes in turn 1 in turn 2 if you've gone first, and it also recycles 1 rune, but you are able to conquer both battlefields in turn 2. This gets you ahead quite well, and yeah, it's something to definitely consider if your opponent has missed out on a 2-drop, or they have started to ramp, so you need to get conquering as early as possible. Now, once you have conquered some battlefields and you're sitting in them comfortably, you want to play with your hidden cards to make the opponent scared of what could be there. If they are not expecting Blastcone Phase, this is a 4 might swing whenever they attack into that battlefield. This is quite significant. And if they start expecting the Blastcone Phase and play around that, sending more expensive units into the battlefield, you can also, of course, just reveal the consult the pasts and draw 2 cards. Maybe even drawing a combat trick off that, and then using that combat trick to win the combat, or at least trade favorably for you. The cheap spells that I could draw in this occasion, or that usually make winning defending combats quite easy, are Disciplines and Stupefies. These you usually see and keep and always play because they immediately replace themselves. And then the biggest might swing, of course, is the Smokescreen with a 4 might swing. Here you can immediately see how valuable the Blastcone Phase are, because they are just as big of a might swing as the Smokescreen, but they only cost 1 recycle if you hit them. Now, other spells, of course, if things are not going as planned, are Retreats, which you can use in your opponent's turn to channel 1 rune exhausted. I prefer to use retreats on units that have like accelerate or proxy accelerate. So, for example, my Sprite Mother or my Thousand-Tailed Watcher in the late game, even though I usually prefer the Thousand-Tailed Watcher to close out games in the first place. Now, on your turn, you have a few more options. Something that you can always do is charm opponents' units into battlefields that you control. This then, for example, can trigger the two Ahris, but it can also just be used to move units out of battlefields and enable an easy conquer, and then it gets you into the position of defending again, which you usually want to be in as Ahri. In case you're playing against green or something else that has a lot of spells, something like Kaiser for example, the defies that I'm running 3 of as well as the wind wall come in quite handy. If I'm playing against a Kaiser and I'm seeing a wind wall, I'm always keeping that to hopefully counter an Icathian Rain or a Time Warp, and the defies I'm using quite aggressively to keep me on battlefields, keep me in control, and especially keep me ahead. Now in the mid game, the most important unit in my opinion is the Sprite Mother. This unit is super versatile. You can play it, run the sprite into one battlefield, and then in the next turn you can send the Sprite Mother into, for example, the same battlefield if it hasn't been conquered by the opponent, bounce the Sprite Mother with a retreat, and then play it again to run another sprite into the second battlefield as an example. Now, towards the end of the game, the 3 most important units that I could play are, I would still count the Sprite Mother as important in the late game as well, but the Ahri Inquisitive, the Thousand-Tailed Watcher, and the Dr. Mundo, of course. Now, Ahri can help quite a lot when you lost a battlefield and you need to reconquer that battlefield for cheap. The Thousand-Tailed Watcher can do the same thing. Usually if I'm trying to set up a Thousand-Tailed Watcher play, I'm on 6 points. I'm retreating my units from both battlefields or from one battlefield if I was only in control of one. And then I'm trying to play the Thousand-Tailed Watcher when having as many units as possible in base. Ideally, I also, of course, keep a wind wall open to get rid of something like an Icathian Rain if I'm playing against a Kaiser. This is also one of the main reasons why I'm looking to replace the Foxfire in my sideboard, because that Foxfire hasn't come in as often as I had hoped, and a second wind wall can be quite essential against Kaiser. Now, talking about some other cards and other synergies in this deck, I think card draw is very important. I already mentioned that when going through the deck list. My main card draw cards are, of course, Stupefy, Discipline, the Watchful Sentry, and Consult the Past. That means I can draw quite consistently while buffing up my units or in the early game. And then Consult the Past, as I already mentioned, can be used as a hidden equivalent to the Blast Cone Fae, leaving my opponent in the dark as to what is actually at this battlefield, and overcommitting, for example, into that battlefield when it's just a Consult the Past. Now, I already mentioned the Wind Wall into Kaiser, because I've been seeing a lot more decked out Kaisers at my locals in the past weeks. I've been slotting in the Wind Wall into the main deck, and I'm also, of course, because of that, considering the second one in the side deck. Importantly, if I'm not playing into Kaiser, I often slot out the Wind Wall, and this is actually one of the rare cases where I could bring in a Foxfire, but usually I'm just playing against something that I want to get rid of equipment or get rid of big units. So I'm just replacing one of these Wind Walls with a Rune Prison or an Adaptatron, and then I just take out an Eager Apprentice to fit in the second Adaptatron, or take out both apprentices for Rune Prisons or something like that. Now, I'm already a bit into the side deck here. If I am going second, I'm always slotting in lecturing Yordles over my watchful sentries. This is just whenever I go second, I'm doing that, increasing my ratio of 3 drops and replacing my 1 might unit, which I'm not that much of a fan of. The enemy can play around that draw effect, while the lecturing Yordle immediately provides that draw effect and then also has tank, so it can save or protect other units that might be more valuable, like my Ahri Inquisitive, for example. Important interactions in this deck are that the Ahri trigger is a targeting ability. So if you're targeting something like a Kiana that has deflect, or a Fiora that has deflect, you just need to pay 1 recycle cost for that target, which can be really annoying. Alternatively, to maybe go into the battlefields a little bit as well, the Trifarian War Camp gets you out of a lot of Kaiser's removal, with the Ahri Inquisitive as an example. But that also applies to the Ravenbloom students, for example, which can get quite big, or the Watchful Sentries, which can then trade with even more units. Now, in addition to that, the Trifarian War Camp also facilitates my Ahri Legend. Because whenever someone attacks into Trifarian War Camp, this could, for example, be a Victor, each of his Legion tokens do not at base might get reduced by Ahri, because she reduces to a minimum of 1. On Trifarian War Camp, they immediately go up to 2 though, resulting in Ahri triggering and reducing these Legion tokens back to 1. This is quite valuable into Victor as an example, and if your locals are playing a lot of Victor, I would definitely consider Trifarian War Camp in Ahri. If I'm going first, I'm always picking Grove of the Godwillow. I'm trying to consistently have a 2-drop each game, meaning that I always want to go into that battlefield as first person in the game, and then I also really want to hold that battlefield, which my deck is also particularly good at, resulting in this being a no-brainer for turn 1, or if I am playing turn 1 on the play. If I'm going second, I tend to play Dreaming Tree. The Dreaming Tree is really good in this deck because I can just use it a lot better than other units or other champions. My Stupefy becomes a 1 mana draw 2. My On Guard gets a draw effect. My Retreat gets a draw effect. My Discipline gets a second draw effect. And I think that's it in this case. But that's quite a lot and I can reliably trigger it in either my turns or my opponent's turns. Now, I already talked mostly about my side deck. I'm of course bringing in the Rune Prison into matchups where I cannot outmight my opponents. I like using this into something like Leona as well, but my main use cases are Yi and Set. The Lecturing Yordle, as I already mentioned, only comes in when I'm playing second. The Foxfire will likely be a second Wind Wall for my next event, so I will slot that one in case I'm playing into Ahri, and I'm playing my 2 Adaptatrons always into Aurora. This has been quite handy in the past. I have not enjoyed running 3 of them too much, but I could see myself swapping in one of the Lecturing Yordles or taking out one of the Lecturing Yordles in the sideboard to fit in a 3rd Adaptatron if I start seeing a lot more Aurora, but I'm usually not seeing that many of them in my local game store. And that would be it for my Budget Ahri Control Decklist guide. I would be happy to also in future videos go into matchup analysis and maybe even Nexus Night recaps, but so far I would like to leave it at that. I hope this was helpful, and feel free to drop any comments with suggestions or questions.